The year is 1914. A young Austrian man flees his home country, for he does not want to serve in the army of Austria. He is caught by police and is put into the Austrian army. This man fights in the 1st Regiment Reserves in France and Belgium. He becomes a lance corporal, and he is also an extreme German nationalist. He watches his comrades fall and gas tear through the enemy soldiers. But in the end, the country he loved and wished nothing but greatness for surrenders to British tanks. This was the Great War, World War I. And this man, Adolf Hitler, will be the catalyst for the greatest, most deadly, and expensive war known to man. Now, to 1918. The Great War ends on the 11th day of the 11th hour of the 11th month of 1918. Germany agrees to an unconditional surrender. This was the Treaty of Versailles. Adolf hated this treaty. It made his home, his country, and the nation he loved weak and at the will of other countries. Hitler wishes nothing but to glorify his homeland and fill it with his perfect Aryan race. He created a new political party, the Nazis, and in 1923, Adolf marched with a small army on Munich. Then he was arrested. But he was so popular, his sentence was reduced from 5 years to 9 months. His popularity grew and grew until 1933. The president made him Chancellor of Germany. He believed he was the mighty savior of Germany and went full-blown megalomaniac. He then installed himself as the second fascist dictator in Europe and the first one in Germany. When in power, Hitler immediately reverses the Treaty of Versailles. He militarizes the Rhineland, which is a small area along the border of France, but gives orders to immediately retreat if the Allies show up. They don't. He makes his first Luftwaffe squadrons, which is like an air force. He builds up his army and his navy. The second part of his plan was to increase the levels of Aryan people in Europe, with a plan called Lebensraum. Pretty much, he needed to take over the world, but for now, Europe would do just fine. So Hitler started eyeing up his neighbors, and this worried the Allies. So they started a diplomatic system called Appeasement. It went a little something like this. Hitler would say, "I want that thing." And the Allies would say, "Oh, no, you can't have that thing. Okay, you can have that thing, but no more." And then Hitler would say, "I want that thing," and so on. It didn't work. Hitler annexed Austria in 1938 and demanded the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia because it had so many ethnic Germans. The Prime Minister of the UK, Neville Chamberlain, flew out to Germany to help settle the dispute and prevent war from breaking out. Hitler and Chamberlain signed the Treaty of Munich, even though the government of Czechoslovakia wasn't there, stating that Hitler wouldn't invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland was surrendered to Germany, and Hitler promised he wouldn't raid and invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Chamberlain was flown home a hero, and a large statue was built in his honor. And on every second Saturday of every year since, we celebrate Chamberlain's Day to honor the man who stopped World War II from happening. Except this didn't happen at all, and this was Hitler. And we have the amazing power called hindsight. He would go on to invade Czechoslovakia. But before we can continue, we must discuss Germany's allies, the rest of the Axis powers. Due to time constraints, I'm going to have to give you a quick rundown of the Axis powers. In Italy, we have a socialist by the name of Benito Mussolini. He created fascism and installed himself as the dictator, the first fascist dictator in all of Europe. He and Hitler had many ideas in common, and Italy didn't do as well as they hoped in the First World War, so Hitler and Mussolini had the same enemies. They gained less territory, and they gained less colonies. In the East, the Empire of Japan was growing with the hate for the Allies after their economy was ruined by Britain and America. They were gaining territory quickly. These were the Axis powers. Now on to the actual fighting. Hitler and the USSR invaded Poland, and Britain and France declared war, and they didn't do anything. Poland fell after picking up a good fight, and still, France and Britain didn't do anything. France made a line of forts along the German border called the Maginot Line, and it was extended to the coast, so the Germans couldn't invade. But it wasn't extended to the coast, so the Germans could just invade Belgium and flank them, and that's what they did. The Allies charged through Belgium with their best armies, leaving little troops in France. The Germans knew that there was a gap in the line in the Ardennes, a thick, near impenetrable forest area along the border. The French thought that this was impenetrable, and the Germans were about to penetrate it with everything they had. So the Germans blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and through Belgium, flanking the Allies, trapping the best of both armies in the town of Dunkirk. A daring rescue by civilian ships brought home hundreds of thousands of English and French soldiers. Without these soldiers in France, it was taken over quickly. Hitler started a puppet state in France called Vichy France to show England that they were all alone. Hitler then tried to invade England, but that was a bust because he couldn't gain air and sea control. So he started Operation Barbarossa. Hitler invaded the USSR. Stalin was surprised, even though America and the English told him what would happen. Hitler made massive progress, taking huge amounts of men and soldiers. In Minsk, they took 660,000 soldiers, which is insane. That's like 100 times the amount of people in Spirit Lake. Hitler made massive progress, taking huge amounts of men and soldiers. Then winter set in, stopping Hitler's advance by now. But Hitler said keep going, because he could have sworn he would have won by now, but he didn't. Italy's military ineptitude made them look stupid when they tried to invade and take over some nations. Seeing Germany's victories, Japan was also about to miss the victory bus. They took over more of China, the East Pacific Islands, and the Philippines, and other small islands. Then they attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, hoping to cripple us so we couldn't defend the islands. That was a big mistake. America declared war on Japan and the Axis powers. Hitler declared war on America, which he didn't have to do, shooting himself in the foot. Just the foot for now. Winter's over now, and Hitler continues his advance into Russia. He tries to cut off the Caucasus, cutting the Russians in half and getting all of that oil in the Caucasus. He got cocky and rerouted his 4th Panzer Division into the Caucasus, leaving only his 6th Army to take Stalingrad. Now Stalin was the leader of the USSR, so if this city fell, so would he, because it is his name. If the city fell, so would Stalin. So it was fiercely defended. Hitler stalled in the winter, let the Russians build their factories in the east, letting them recreate their army and their air force. The Germans were encircled and they were pushed back. Then the Allies pushed the Axis out of Africa. America beat the Japanese at the Battle of Midway and kept pushing them through the Pacific. In 1944, the Allies invaded Sicily. Most citizens had relatives in America, so the Allies were welcomed. People were becoming nervous. The Italians were becoming nervous with the war coming so close. So they overthrew Mussolini and started to try to negotiate for peace. Hitler expected this because Italy was weak, and he sent troops into Italy to disarm soldiers and hold Italy. On the night of July 5th of 1944, paratroopers dropped in behind the beaches of Normandy to destroy bridges and communication lines and sabotage artillery. Then on July 6th, 1944, the Allies made the largest sea-to-land invasion in history, D-Day. After supplying the Germans with false information for months, the Allies landed at 4 beaches in Normandy, France. Then France was liberated, with many nations on the way. The Germans, when the Allies were along the German border, tried to do what they did at the beginning of the war. And they blitzed through the Ardennes. This made a pretty big bulge in the line. And they almost took the town of Bastogne. During the siege, the Germans sent a message to the Americans: surrender or be annihilated. The soldiers took it to their commanding officer, and he said, they want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender. And the officer said, nuts! And this was their official reply. And this General Patton's army, coming from the south, broke the siege and saved the troops, and the Germans were halted, and then they were pushed back. The Allies pushed east while the Germans pushed west and took Berlin. Hitler supposedly killed himself in his bunker, and the Nazis crumbled. But still in the Pacific, the Japanese just wouldn't quit. So in a show of force, after a fierce island-hopping campaign, the only nuclear bombs in war were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Little Boy and Fat Man. Looking back at World War II, we can see the perfect circumstances that led to the most damaging war of all time. And in the end, I hope you've all learned something, or just enjoyed the speech. I was going to try to ham-fist a message about Donald Trump, and if he's a fascist, like the left says, but I won't do that. World War II is an amazing, intriguing set of stories of heroes and villains. It also shows us what happens when humans become hopeless. It also shows us what happens when we let government too far. So, 3 things. Number 1, don't let your government go too far. Number 2, never lose hope. And number 3, you can trust other people. Thank you. T-Money Trap. Here you go.
Do I have to send you my